A key to reading Bible names that you can't pronounce. Just try it as quickly as you can without trying too hard, and it tends to come close. There was a time when my dad would substitute the name George for any Bible name he couldn't pronounce. First Chronicles chapters 1 through 9 was a lot of George begat George, and that was okay. The point I'm trying to make is this: you don't have to pronounce it correctly. God doesn't take offense if you can't read an English translation of a Hebrew name. That being said, the end of Genesis chapter 22 is just this: a genealogy. So here we go. Genesis 22, 20 through 24 says this: Now it came to pass after these things that it was told Abraham, saying, Indeed, Milcah has borne children to your brother Nahor. Huz his firstborn, Buz his brother, Kemuel the father of Aram, Chesed, Hazo, Pildash, Jidlaph, and Bethuel. And Bethuel begot Rebekah. These 8 Milcah bore to Nahor, Abraham's brother. His concubine, whose name was Reumah, also bore Tebah, Gaham, Thahash, and Maacah. Now, 3 important names in this are those of Nahor, Abraham's brother, Nahor's youngest son Bethuel, hence being named last, and his daughter, Bethuel's daughter, Rebekah. Women were not always included in genealogies. So when one is mentioned, it's for a reason. And the reason being is that she's going to show up in the next few chapters. And so her name is listed among these men. And though there are great Bible names for kids, 2 of my favorites are Huz and Buz from this passage, being a great name for twins. We have to remember that these names are recorded for the purpose of giving credence to the narrative, in terms of something people could go research for themselves. If they had any suspicion that a certain genealogy wasn't true in works of, they could go and look in these places for the genealogical records which people kept in those days. You could go to Ur of the Chaldees, where Abraham was born, and research his genealogy. This is stuff that can be researched, and some of these lists have been found. In works of fiction, you don't have genealogies typically, except in Tolkien's Lord of the Rings. Why? Because it adds a sense of realism to the history. History is full of so-and-so, son of so-and-so, who fought in, this war, and, so that you could trace who they were, what they were doing, and who they were related to. And so God put genealogies into the Bible because it's the credentials that what God was saying could, in fact, be verified. Remember, the book of Genesis was written down by Moses over 400 years afterward from the wilderness, and not from the locations of the story that Genesis take place. In fact, Moses never entered the promised land. So how did he know these things? God directly told him these things, and he wrote them down. So God includes the credentials of Abraham and his family, as well as the genealogies of people in the land. In the land of Canaan, the Hittites, the Jebusites, the Philistines also would have records of genealogies, and therefore they could trace these things as well. And they would record certain stories from their point of view, which corroborate the Bible. Archaeology has discovered time and time again that the names, dates, and locations that the Bible speaks about actually existed at the times God said they existed, with the names of the people that God said were there. It's helped archaeologists find the ancient world, because they would look it up and say, it's supposed to be about here, and they go and look, and lo and behold, what do you know? It's actually there. There have been great archaeological discoveries over the last 100 years that have proved time and time again that the Bible is accurate in names, in times when things happen, the dates in history that they happen, and the locations where they happened. This is because the Bible isn't just another book with history recorded in it. It's the very divinely inspired, God-breathed words of God himself as written down by faithful men who God chose. We see this in 2 Peter chapter 1. Verses 16 through 19. For we did not follow cunningly devised fables when we made known to you the power and coming of our Lord Jesus Christ, but were eyewitnesses of his majesty. For he received from God the Father honor and glory when such a voice came to him from the excellent glory, "This is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased." And we heard this voice which came from heaven when we were with him on the holy mountain. And so we have the prophetic word confirmed, which you do well to heed as a light that shines in a dark place until the day dawns and the morning star shines in your heart. The coming of Jesus was recorded in the Old Testament, who he would be, what he would do, and why he would do it. And the apostles writing the Gospels, they didn't have to make anything up, but could easily verify it through the Old Testament, a collection of books that has proven itself trustworthy all over the world due to the prevalence of people reading the books and understanding it. During Jesus' day and afterwards, the first century, the two books that were read the most from all people, they would read the books of Deuteronomy to understand the Jews, and also the book of Isaiah. Isaiah was a conundrum to them because in it something is prophesied and it comes true and it's very specific. Isaiah chapter 45. When God says this, "Thus says the Lord to his anointed, to Cyrus, whose right hand I have held, to subdue nations before him, and loose the armor of kings, to open before him the double doors, so that the gates will not be shut. I will go before you, and make the crooked places straight. I will break in pieces the gates of bronze, and cut the bars of iron. I will give you the treasures of darkness and hidden riches of secret places, that you may know that I, the Lord, who call you by your name, am the God of Israel. For Jacob my servant's sake, and Israel my elect, I have even called you by your name. I have named you, though you have not known me. I am the Lord, and there is no other. There is no God besides me. I will gird you, though you have not known me, that they may know from the rising of the sun to its setting, that there is none besides me. I am the Lord, and there is no other. I form the light, and I create darkness. I make peace and create calamity. I, the Lord, do all these things." And in verse 13 he says this, "I have raised him up in righteousness, and I will direct all his ways. He shall build me a city and let my exiles go free, not for price nor reward, says the Lord of hosts." This passage lays out a man who wasn't going to be born for another 150 years. Cyrus, the Great of Persia. Here God lays out that God himself is the one who will prepare the way for Cyrus to take over the world under his empire, to make him wealthy with treasures from other nations, so that he would help the children of Israel to return from their exile and also to pay for it. Pay for it out of his own coffers, because the God of the Israelites was the one supporting his rule for the sake of God's people. They read this passage to Cyrus, and he saw in it that it was true, because by that time he knew the history of Israel and knew how long ago this was written by Isaiah, 150 years before his birth, calling him by name, not a Jewish name, a Greek name, Cyrus. So he said, okay, God is the one prospering me. He already said that he would, and he has done it. I'm going to support his people. So he paid for the rebuilding of Jerusalem and the temple, allowed the Jews to return with full support from the empire. 2 Chronicles is the final book in the Jewish Old Testament. When they collected the books, they put 2 Chronicles at the end. And the very last verses of 2 Chronicles is verses 22 and 23, which say this. Now in the first year of Cyrus, king of Persia, it was in the first year of Cyrus, king of Persia, that the word of the Lord by the mouth of the prophet Jeremiah might be fulfilled. The Lord stirred up the spirit of Cyrus, king of Persia, so that he made a proclamation throughout all his kingdom, and also put it in writing, saying, "Thus says Cyrus, king of Persia, all the kingdoms of the earth the Lord God of heaven has given me. And he's commanded me to build him a house at Jerusalem, which is in Judah. Who is among you of all his people? May the Lord his God be with him, and let him go up." This document, by the way, was found by archaeologists. And the exact date it's proclaimed is actually recorded in historical records as a fixed date in the Old World. And it's used by biblical historians, along with Daniel chapter 9, to show the math to the exact date Jesus rode into Jerusalem on a donkey, based on how many years from the proclamation of Cyrus. And this was math that could be done before Jesus came on the scene. But nobody did it. Well, possibly one, the guy who had the donkey. He was ready, but no one else was. We can look back now on this and go, wow, that's incredible. But that's because God knows the end from the beginning. He knows the dates when things will happen, and he told us, Daniel chapter 9, how long it was going to be before Jesus rode into Jerusalem on a donkey. And this is why God includes things like genealogies, details like this of where things are and landmarks and certain trees even, to eliminate any doubt as to his word's authenticity with everyone who came after. You could go and look it up and research it, and it's true. Genesis 23, verses 1 and 2. Sarah lived 127 years. These were the years of the life of Sarah. So Sarah died in Kirjath Arba, that is in Hebron, in the land of Canaan. And Abraham came to mourn for Sarah and to weep for her. Now, Sarah's age was 127 years old, and because of that, we can determine how old Isaac was at this time, as well as how old Abraham was. Abraham was 100 years old when Isaac was born. And so we know that Sarah was 90 when Ishmael was born, Genesis 17:18. Ishmael was between 10 and 13 years old when Isaac was weaned at about 5 years of age in those days. And it's based on the Hebrew word used for lad for the young man, for Ishmael. Genesis 21:20. In chapter 21, when Abraham took Isaac to Mount Horeb for his sacrifice to the Lord, they use the same word lad, so this adds up to Isaac being about 8 to 13 years old at that time. And the math is able to be done, showing that Sarah was about in her 90s when Isaac was born, making her about 9 or 10 years younger than her brother Abraham. And she died at the age of 127, making Isaac a man of about 37 years old at the time of her death. Why is this important? Because he's not a little kid. A lot of times in the Bible, we think of people as little kids. David was a strong man. He was a late teenager. He had already faced bears and lions when he fought Goliath. Daniel was 80 years old when he was thrown to the lion's den. Moses was 80 years old when he led the children of Israel. And sometimes we forget this because of what Hollywood does and tries to show us of the ages of these people, and they get it all wrong because they don't go to the scriptures to show the truth. So, the importance of ages in the Old Testament is really important to the Jewish people, because in the Old Testament, you didn't have a standard calendar like we have. They had the age of people and when they had their first kid, or when they had a certain kid that followed a genealogy. And only after people do the math and work backwards from known dates and times did truthful Bible scholars proclaim the earth is young. In fact, it's about just over 6,000 years. The Jews date their years starting with creation week, and they work forward based on the genealogies and timelines in the scriptures. And from dating from there to the year 0, or AD, there's 4,004 years. We add 2026 to that, and we are in the year 6030, or thereabouts, in the Jewish calendar. Give or take a few years, maybe a decade. Another thing to note about this passage is where it says Abraham came to mourn for Sarah. This was because there were a great number of tents that they had. There was the man's tent where all the men would sleep, that Abraham had his own tent for during the day. There was a tent for the men to sleep in. There was his wife's tent and a tent for the women to sleep in. There was a tent for the staff. There was a tent for keeping sick animals under care. There was a tent for storage. So here it isn't saying that Abraham and Sarah lived apart from one another. This is saying that Abraham, when Sarah died, goes into the woman's tent to see where she was laying as she died so that he could mourn over her. And then they could take care of her from there. Genesis 23, 3-6. Then Abraham stood up from before his dead, and he spoke to the sons of Heth, saying, I'm a foreigner and a visitor among you. Give me property for a burial place among you, that I may bury my dead out of my sight. And the sons of Heth answered Abraham, saying to him, Hear us, my lord, you're a mighty prince among us. Bury your dead in the choicest of our burial places. None of us will withhold from you his burial place, that you may bury your dead. In other cultures, when negotiating, you don't just go and say, how much for your property? First, Abraham asked if the owners would even consider selling it. As he wasn't a person of the land, he was a stranger and a foreigner among them, as he has confessed before. And as we see in Hebrews, it says, These all died in faith, not having received the promises, but having seen them afar off, and were assured of them. They embraced them and confessed that they were strangers and pilgrims on the earth. And by this time, many people knew of Abraham and his wealth and his fame, because God had spread Abraham's reputation as God said he would. Genesis 22:17, Blessing I will bless you, multiplying I will multiply your descendants as the stars of heaven, and as the sandwiches on the seashore, and your descendants shall possess the gates of their enemies. And God has blessed him and given him a great name among the people. And so Abraham is not just some fly-by-night guy. They know him. They know who he is. They answer him respectfully. They call him Lord, or honored one. And they acknowledge he's a mighty prince, a leader. And they say they are open to negotiate for whatever piece of land he wishes to purchase, but he doesn't have to buy land at all. He can bury his dead along with theirs in any place of burial because, hey, we would love to have you around. Now, this happens all around the world today. Haggling for price and purchase is done every day all over the world, and if you play along with them and learn their cultural practices, you'll be able to haggle to a reasonable price without offending them. Something, unfortunately, people from the USA have not mastered, which makes us hated all over the world as tourists. We come with Western ideas of the past 250 years of the United States. This is the 250th year that we've been here as the United States. I went into a church in England where the newest part of the church was built in the 1200s, and they still called it the new wing of the church. There were people from the Crusades buried out in the cemetery, and I saw the gravestones from the 900s there. We have very little history on the time scale of other countries. And not according to the thousands of years of tradition that they hold to, even from the time of Abraham to today, the negotiation, the haggling, the prices. We need to learn the culture of the people around us before we try to change their culture, before we try to evangelize them. This was the meaning of Paul's all things to all people passage in 1 Corinthians 9. He said, For though I am free from all men, I have made myself a servant to all, that I might win more. And to the Jews I became as a Jew, that I might win Jews. To those who are under the law, as under the law, that I might win those who are under the law. To those who are without law, as without law, not being without law towards Christ, that I might win those who are without law. To the weak I became as weak, that I might win the weak. I have become all things to all men, that I might by all means save some. Now this I do for the gospel's sake, that I may be partaker of it with you. It's about learning the culture of the people and adapting so as not to knowingly offend them and turn them away from hearing the gospel. Paul became as a Jew. He didn't go back to being a Jew. It says when he was in the Jewish culture, he went along with the Jewish culture. When he was evangelizing those who were kept under the law as Jews, he didn't knowingly offend them. He didn't break the laws of the Jews because he didn't want to offend them. He didn't want to push them away. When he went to those who are not under the law of God, it's a different story, and he became as one of them. Not was without law with Christ. He was following Christ's law, but he had to learn their culture in order to evangelize them. And it was all for the sake of the gospel. And it wasn't putting on a mask. It was learning and applying. If missionaries today, as they go over to other cultures, they are told, you spend a couple years getting to know the culture, get to know the people, get to know the language before you start evangelizing. Why? Because there's a lot of different cultures and traditions out there that if we break them, they won't listen. And they will kick us out or kill us. And that doesn't further the gospel. Like learning their culture and learning how not to offend them would. It's not putting on a mask in front of the people, but being non-offensive to them on purpose, learning their ways and finding a means of opportunity to present the gospel. It's so important for us in the culture around us that we don't just hit them with the Bible. We show them the Bible. We open it for them. We show them what it means. Genesis 23, 7 through 16. And Abraham stood up and bowed himself to the people of the land, the sons of Heth. And he spoke with them, saying, if it's your wish that I bury my dead out of my sight, hear me, and meet with Ephron, the son of Zohar, for me, that he may give me the cave of Machpelah, which he has, which is at the end of his field. Let him give it to me at full price, as property for a burial place among you. Now Ephron dwelt among the sons of Heth, and Ephron the Hittite answered Abraham in the presence of the sons of Heth, all who entered at the gates of the city, saying, no, my lord, hear me. I give you the field and the cave that's in it. I give it to you in the presence of the sons of my people. I give it to you to bury your dead. Abraham bowed himself down before the people of the land. He spoke to Ephron in the hearing of the people of the land, saying, if you will give it, please hear me. I will give you money for the field. Take it from me, and I'll bury my dead there. And Ephron answered Abraham, saying to him, my lord, listen to me. The land is worth 400 shekels of silver. What's that between you and me? So bury your dead. And Abraham listened to Ephron, and Abraham weighed out the silver for Ephron, which he had named in the hearing of the sons of Heth, 400 shekels of silver, currency of the merchants. Notice the way they haggled here. First, Abraham says what piece of property he wants to buy at full price. Don't give me any discounts or preferential treatment. This was because Abraham intended to keep the property for all succeeding generations and wanted it well documented among the inhabitants of the land, whoever they may be 1,000 years later. Because people in that time thought of generations to come, not just of the next generation. Abraham was looking down the road of the next 400 years for when his descendants would return to Canaan to possess it, as God had told him would happen back in chapter 15. Genesis 15. God says, know certainly that your descendants will be strangers in a land that's not theirs and will serve them. They'll afflict them for 400 years. And also the nation whom they serve I will judge. Afterwards they shall come out with great possessions. Now as for you, you shall go to your fathers in peace. You shall be buried at a good old age. But in the 4th generation they'll return here, for the iniquity of the Amorites is not yet complete. And it came to pass, when the sun went down and it was dark, that behold, there appeared a smoking oven and a burning torch that passed between those pieces. On the same day the Lord made a covenant with Abram, saying, to your descendants I have given this land, from the river of Egypt to the great river, the river Euphrates, the Kenites, the Kenizzites, the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Perizzites, the Rephaim, the Amorites, the Canaanites, the Girgashites, and the Jebusites. That's through verse 21. And it's Abraham knew that all the land would be his descendants after him, but it was going to be a long ways off, and he wanted a record that this cave right here belonged to him and his descendants. And so he paid full price, and he purchased it from the Hittites, who he had told they would be kicked out. But he wanted to make sure his burial site would not be desecrated or resold to others in the future. And so Ephron set his price and said, just take it. It's yours. And this phrase is used all over the world as a negotiating tactic even today. It's saying, here's the price, you pay it. If not, we can remain friends. We can remain cordial. Even if you can't do this, hey, we'll work something out. But Abraham pays the 400 shekels of silver and gets a deed to that property, which in their minds is his property from then on until Abraham sells it, not anybody else's. And shekels in the Bible are different from the Old Testament to the New Testament. In the Old Testament, they're a weight. In the New Testament, it's a certain coin. 400 shekels of silver equates to how many pounds of silver, not just 400 coins. This is because of the difference in coin weights. If people are minting their own coins, they might not all be the same weight, the same amount of silver, and therefore someone might get cheated out of a few ounces of silver. So instead, they just weighed the silver no matter what form it was in. It was only after the Babylonians under Nebuchadnezzar established common currency throughout the entire empire that the shekel would mean a coin. And it was a certain weight of coin. And that was the shekel. Here it's saying that the silver was the currency of the day, not gold. So the stack of silver that he purchases this land for is roughly 200 ounces, or roughly 12.5 pounds of silver. That's a good amount of silver. That was what they weighed out. That is what he wanted, so they weighed it out, and there it was. Genesis 23:17 through 20. So the field of Ephron, which was in Machpelah, which was before Mamre, the field and the cave which was in it, and all the trees that were in the field, which were within all the surrounding borders, were deeded to Abraham as a possession in the presence of the sons of Heth, before all who went in at the gate of his city. And after this, Abraham buried Sarah his wife in the cave of the field of Machpelah, before Mamre, which is Hebron, in the land of Canaan. So the field and the cave that's in it were deeded to Abraham by the sons of Heth as property for a burial place. Now, Abraham knows he's going to die of old age, and so he needs a burial place too, and so he buys this. And the land is deeded to Abraham and his descendants after him in the gates of the city. The gates of the city were basically city hall. The leaders of the city would sit on benches in the gates as people would come in. That is where they would make laws. That's where they would write down, record, and chronicle for posterity anything that happened in the city of importance, including sales of property and who owned what and who was running for government and what laws were enacted for their city. That was all recorded, and they could retrieve these at will to end all disputes because they had the records and they would keep them. This is what happened in that day and age in every city gate of every major city. Doesn't matter how many years later it was. They found in the gates of certain cities the records from Abraham's day in some of these cities of the Middle East because they kept them on tablets that didn't rot, they didn't fall apart, and they kept them organized and neatly found. And when they found the gates of the city, some of them were broken, but they were able to read basic court records. That's important because people had been living a lot longer than just 100 years previous to this. In fact, Noah, he lived 950 years. He lived a total of 950 years. And Noah and Noah's son Shem lived up until Abraham's day. Noah died just about 10 years before Abraham was born, and his son Shem lived at this time currently we're looking at with Abraham. They lived at the same time up until the very next chapter in Genesis, basically. This means people could go directly to them and talk with them. Those that had gone in the past were still around because They had long lifespans. After the flood, they started getting shorter and shorter and shorter. And so all these people are dying around the same time, even though these are much younger than these. Shem lived 600 years after the flood. And so, when we come to the days of Abraham, Jacob tells that, he didn't live as long as his forefathers. And he lived 137 years. 130 years. Because of drastic climate changes after the flood, God put a limit on the age people could achieve. And after this, we read from the days of Moses. Moses was 80 years old when he led the children of Israel for the next 40 years. He died at 120 years old. And he wrote this in Psalm 90. The days of our lives are 70 years. If by reason of strength they're 80 years, yet their boast is only labor and sorrow, for it's soon cut off and we fly away. You see, the average age people died around Moses' day, and after, even to today, the median age of death is 80 years old. And so, we have to look at the ages in the Bible as put there for a reason. And all this to say, we as people today don't think about the future nearly as much as people used to. We may think about the next generation. They were thinking about the next 100 years. And how my choices today will affect future generations. Not just the next one, but the one after that. Not like Abraham did. He looked past his own life to the future. God promised the people to come 4 generations down the road. That through his seed all the nations of the world shall be blessed because he obeyed God's voice. Genesis 22:18. That's what we need to do to ensure future generations will be blessed because of us. And that's for us individually to obey God's word. Obey his Son, Jesus Christ. And through our obedience to live for God and pass on our faith to the next generation, we've ensured that future generations will be blessed because of us. Abraham looked farther. He looked farther than 400 years in the future because he looked to the seed that would come, and that seed, being singular, is Christ. Christ who was to come. And Abraham so lived by faith, looking forward to the Messiah, waiting for when he would come. And we hear this from Jesus in the book of John, chapter 8. Jesus said, "Your father Abraham rejoiced to see my day, and he saw it and was glad." The Jews said to him, "You're not yet 50 years old, and have you seen Abraham?" Jesus said to them, "Most assuredly I say to you, before Abraham was, I am." And he used the name for God for himself, that he is the great I am, who was there being worshipped by Abraham, and who Abraham obeyed and was called a friend of God.